Hello, welcome to EPG Pathshala. I'm Jayashilan. I teach linguistics. I'm a professor who retired from the English and Foreign Languages University, Hyderabad. The unit which we are presenting now is part of the module Advanced Syntax. In an earlier unit, we introduced you to the theory of minimalism, which we said is the next big development in linguistic theory after GB. We continue with minimalism in this unit. This unit is called Minimalism, Movement and Feature Checking. An important difference between the minimalist claims about movement and that of GB is that in minimalism it is assumed that movement is not free. That you remember move alpha, which said that move anything, anywhere, from anywhere to anywhere. But in minimalism, movement has to be motivated. Only then things move. If there is no motivation for a phrase to move, it does not move. Therefore, we have to have mechanisms that implement movement. Things move only when they are forced to move. What forces them to move? It is a threat of a crash that makes things move. That is, if something does not move, the derivation will crash. And that is why things move. And the function of the feature checking mechanism, which we are going to present right now, is to implement the necessary movements. There are certain movements which are necessary. If since the movements take place only when they are forced to, and movements are not free, so there has to be a mechanism which forces things to move, and the feature checking mechanism has just that purpose. What would be an example of a necessary movement? As you perhaps know, the subject of a clause is, in the current theory, generated within VP. This is called the VP internal subject hypothesis. This has been around for about 15 to 20 years now. So if the subject is generated within the VP, it has to move to its surface position, which is the spec position of tense, to the left of tense, because the subject always shows up before the tensed verb. So this is a necessary movement, at least in most of the world's languages. There are certain languages where the subject can stay below, VSO languages like Arabic, where the movement of the subject to the spec of TP is determined by certain other factors. But in all the Indian languages and in English and European languages, the subject moves to its surface position, which is to the left of tense. It moves, we say, to the spec of TP, tense phrase. So this is a necessary movement. How do we implement this? We implement it by two devices. We say that tense has agreement features, that is, person, number, gender features. As you know, in many languages the verb agrees with the subject. It is this agreement of the tense's agreement features which show up on the verb when the verb adjoins to tense. When the verb adjoins to tense, it picks up not only the tense morpheme but the agreement morpheme also. So in the tense head, also called the inflection head, there is both tense and agreement features. Now these agreement features have to agree with the subject. You don't want the verb being inflected for feminine gender when the subject is masculine gender, or the subject is feminine and the verb is masculine. You want the two to match. And we say that the subject checks the agreement features of the tense by moving to the spec of TP. This checking of features is done in a spec head configuration. What does that mean? The subject goes into the spec of TP. The head of TP is T, and T has these agreement features, and the subject of course comes with its inherent person, number, gender features. For example, the verb he, the noun phrase he, is third person singular masculine, and the tense should also have these features, third person singular masculine. If they don't match, the derivation crashes. The derivation crashes. The derivation also crashes if the subject does not raise to spec TP, because the checking of the features is done in a spec head configuration, at least in early minimalism. The picture will change later on, but at the moment let us stick to early minimalism. In early minimalism we say that feature checking is done in a spec head configuration. The subject moves to the spec of TP and the subject checks the head of TP, namely tense. And if the subject does not raise to the spec of TP, the agreement features of tense are not checked and deleted. We say that they are deleted for the LF component. Okay? And if they are not deleted, the derivation crashes, because a tense which is masculine makes no sense. So the semantic component says, I can't make any sense of this. Okay? I can make sense of masculine on the subject. He is masculine. But a past tense being masculine or feminine makes no sense. So this has to be deleted. So these features are uninterpretable features which have to be checked and deleted. And if the subject does not raise to a spec of TP and delete the agreement features of the tense, then they remain on tense, and at the LF interface they will be uninterpretable and the derivation crashes. So you see how the checking theory forces movement. Because if the movement does not take place, the derivation would crash. Let us take another example of a necessary movement. As you know, the verb must raise and adjoin to tense, because in most of the world's languages, including Indian languages, English, European languages, tense appears as a suffix of the verb, and therefore the verb must go and left adjoin to tense, so that tense shows up on the right hand side of the verb as a suffix. So the V to T movement, the verb raising to tense, the tense head, is a necessary movement, at least in many languages. There are certain languages in the world where the tense does not affix to the verb, but that's a different matter. Okay? In English and in Indian languages, most of the world's languages, the verb does raise to tense. Now, as we said earlier, movement is not free, it must be forced. So what would force the verb to go and adjoin to tense. For this, both tense and the verb are given certain features. Tense is given the redundant feature plus V, which must be checked by the verb. The tense head is given a redundant feature plus V, which the verb must go and check. Similarly, the verb comes with a redundant tense feature plus past or minus past. When the verb raises and adjoins to tense, the verb checks the plus V feature of tense and deletes it, because it is a redundant feature. And the tense checks and deletes the plus past or minus past feature of the verb, because there again it is a redundant feature. If the verb does not raise to tense, what happens? The plus V feature on the tense remains, and the plus or minus past feature or the verb remains. These are uninterpretable at the LF interface, and the derivation crashes. Now we said that the verb raises to tense and that it is a necessary movement. But there is a twist to this story, because it has been claimed that in modern English the main verb does not raise to tense in the overt syntax. That is, it raises in the covered part of the syntax, but it does not raise in a visible way. This is not true of the other European languages. This is also not true of Old English or Middle English, but this is a feature of modern English. How do we say that in modern English the main verb does not raise to tense in the visible part of the syntax? Let us contrast French and English. In French, in English you say, look at the position of the verb and an adverb in the following sentence. John often kisses Mary. John often kisses Mary. The adverb comes before the verb. The verb follows the adverb. John often kisses Mary. In French, this is said, I won't read the French sentence, but the order is John kisses often Mary. That's the only possible order. John kisses often Mary. The verb precedes the adverb. In French, the verb follows the adverb. In English. How do we account for this parametric difference? Let us say that the adverb is generated in the space between the VP and tense, the tense phrase, that is above the VP. Therefore, if the verb were to move and adjoins to adjoin to tense, then the verb will come to the left of the adverb. If the verb does not raise out of VP but stays in situ, then the adverb will come before the verb. In English, the verb does not move, and therefore the adverb comes before the verb. In French, the verb moves to tense, and therefore the verb precedes the adverb. Okay, we have a story about the French-English parametric difference. This is a well-known example of a parametric difference between languages. In modern English, the main verb does not raise to tense in the overt syntax. In French and most other European languages, the verb does raise to tense. But again, we said that in minimalism, no movement is free. It has to be forced. So what would force the verb to move? in French, and what would make it possible for the English verb not to move. We say that in French, we said that the verb raises to tense because the tense is endowed with a redundant feature plus V. A redundant feature plus V. Suppose we say that there is a difference between a feature can be strong or weak. In French, the plus V feature of tense is strong, we say. Therefore, if the verb does not rise to tense and the plus V feature of tense is not deleted, the derivation would crash. We say that the plus V feature of modern English, the plus V feature of tense of modern English is weak. It need not be deleted. It does not make the derivation crash. So there is a distinction between weak and strong features in minimalism. As we know, there are languages in which the WH phrase moves to the beginning of the clause or the sentence, like English. You saw what becomes what did you see? Whereas in a whole lot of other languages, most of the Indian languages, and Chinese, Japanese, etc., the WH phrase does not move to the beginning of the sentence. It stays in situ, in the place where it is generated. So there is WH movement in the visible syntax in English and many European languages. There is no WH movement in most Indian languages and in Chinese, Japanese, etc. So this is a major parametric difference between languages. There are languages with WH movement and there are languages without WH movement. So how do we implement this parametric difference? We again appeal to strong and weak features. We say that the head of the comp node, the C node, has a plus WH feature. And it is this plus WH feature which attracts the WH phrase to its comp position, to its spec position, to its spec position. The C head has a plus WH feature which attracts the WH feature to its spec position. When the WH phrase is in the spec of CP, then the plus WH feature of the interrogative C head is deleted by the WH phrase. This checking by the WH phrase of the plus WH feature on the head of CP, namely C, is done again in a spec head configuration. And if the plus WH feature of C is not deleted, that is, if the WH phrase does not raise to spec CP, then the derivation crashes because the plus WH feature of C will not be deleted. Now, that is okay for English. What do we say about Chinese, Japanese, and Indian languages? We say that, okay, the interrogative C has a plus WH feature in our languages also, but this feature is weak. It does not matter if it is not deleted. It will not make the derivation crash. So that is how we account for the parametric difference between WH movement languages and WH in situ languages. But you know, okay, in our languages, the WH phrase does not have to move to check the plus WH feature of C. It is not forced to, because the feature is weak. It does not matter if it survives to LF. But what would prevent it from still moving? That is, it is not necessary for the WH phrase to move. But something seems to prohibit the WH phrase from moving to spec CP in our languages. What prohibits it? In minimalism, there is this interesting idea that there is a certain lethargy in the system. Lethargy means laziness in the system. A kind of least effort principle. Okay? If some effort need not be made, don't make it. In the first minimalist paper, Chomsky formulated this lethargy of the system as two principles, namely procrastinate and last resort. Procrastinate says, if you can do an operation, for example a movement, later or earlier, do it later. For example, a WH phrase has to go to spec of C in the LF component for interpreting the scope of the WH phrase. But that can be done later in our languages because the plus WH feature of C is weak. It need not be deleted in the overt component. So the movement can be done earlier or later, and in that situation you can do it later. You do it later. The second principle is the principle of last resort. It says alpha moves, a phrase moves only if the derivation would crash otherwise. The derivation will not crash. It will just not move because the system is lethargic. There's the principle of least effort. Okay, in this unit, what did we learn? We learned about a few more things about minimalist theory. We importantly learned about the checking, feature checking mechanism of the minimalist theory. In minimalism, movement is not free. A phrase moves only if it's forced to move, and a phrase is forced to move only if the derivation would crash otherwise. And the forcing of the movement is implemented by this feature checking mechanism. Thank you.